Edward Gangi was adopted at birth in New York City. An only child, he made no effort to explore his hereditary unit. Until about age 69, he took a visit to cemetery where members of his adopted mother's family were buried, and that stirred his interest. As meticulous research has yielded two books, The Best, The Gift Best Given, a memoir published in May of 2020, and Gliding Through Goodbye, June of 2025. Ed and his wife Linda live in Hillsborough, North Carolina, just down the road from where I am. Their son James and his wife Renee and their first grandchild Emery live in nearby Durham. So, and we will also give his website information in the show notes. Welcome to your podcast, Ed. It's so good to see you today.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
And congratulations on your two books. That's
Well,
pretty
thank you.
amazing. And I have to say, I'm going to actually pull a picture up here of the covers. I don't know if I have them in the right order. I think this is the first one. The Gift Best Given. And I love the cover. Did you design it yourself?
I've got a very good friend who is a graphic designer, and he and I worked on it together. We were looking for something that reflected the period. That's a picture from 1947. And I will also confess that we have a local author here in Hillsborough who's quite well known, Lee Smith,
Mhm.
and she wrote an autobiographical book called Dime Store. And I confess to kind of piggybacking on the style of her book. It just seems so appropriate.
Well, some of the time when, because, being a publisher, I see a lot of different things come through. And some people say, don't put a personal picture on the cover, but there's an unless. The unless is exactly what you did. Unless you make it appealing and, make it as a work of art, which is exactly what you have here. It's a
Yeah,
work
there's a
of
very
art.
special story that ties to that photograph, and I don't know if you want to hear it at this point or
I
not, but
I would love to hear it.
yeah, I went on a journey as you started saying when I was approaching my 69th birthday to identify the woman who had placed me for adoption when I was a day old. And through all sorts of research and good luck and the kindness of other people, I discovered a great deal. I found out that my birth mother had passed away a few years prior. And so that was the price I paid for having waited so long. But I did meet my maternal half brother, and it took a little while to convince him of my story and that we shared the same mother.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but once I did that, he pulled out some photo albums that my mother had kept, and she had kept them very, very meticulously.
Oh,
And each one was labeled, each photo was labeled. It was chronological, so it was the date, who she was with, where she was with. And in the point of still trying to convince him that he and I were the sons of the same mother, he pulled out that album and he started going from 1942 to 43 to 44. And it's a big album of black and white brownie snapshots.
yeah.
And you probably remember them. Some of the
Oh,
listeners
yeah.
probably do not, but
I
they were
sure
just
do.
little 3 by 3 black and white pictures. And
Mhm.
as he got to 1946, I already knew that I was conceived in San Francisco, California in August of 1947. And as he got to 1946 and was about to flip the page, I said, I don't know what's on that next page, but your mother, my mother, was in San Francisco in the summer of 1947, and that's when I was conceived. And he flipped the page, and in the midst of that page was the color photograph that's on the book cover.
Mhm.
And it's dated August 1947, San Francisco, California. And it was the only color picture in the entire album.
Wow.
So it was just something I could not avoid giving a
Mhm.
prominent place.
Wow. 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 That's kind of gives you chill bumps to think about that. Wow. And then we have the other book cover. I'll share that. Go. And this is some gliding goodbye. That's another beautiful picture.
Yeah, my birth mother was a celebrity performer. And this I learned as I searched in the big ice skating shows in the 1940s and the 1950s. And this one was taken in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 1950 when she was touring with a company called Ice Vogues, which ultimately turned into Holiday on Ice.
Mhm.
And this is a promotional photograph that was shot down there. And again, it just, this was taken a year and a half after my birth. And it just seemed like such an appropriate, actually, it was shot in 1949. I apologize. So it was about a year after my birth. And I just thought it told her story. It showed who she was.
Yeah, and there's something about when I look at the picture, it's like I want to look behind her eyes and know what she's thinking.
And that's pretty much what that book was about.
Mhm. Exactly, exactly. So, wow, you're very, I guess, fortunate to have those pictures to remember your mother by.
I
I'm
was
sorry,
extremely fortunate.
I'm sorry that you weren't able to actually meet her in person, but boy, having photographs does help a lot. And wow, and then you have a brother from that, and so the family grew.
I,
Wow.
we talk about that all the time. We have all of these additional relatives now. I do have the maternal half brother through a DNA sample. I found I had a paternal half brother, and I have a number of cousins on my maternal side. And then it's been a wonderful reunion. I've come to know pretty much all of them.
So you'd use the DNA testing to find
Yeah,
your.
and I did that before I ever embarked on the journey of writing or researching the story and then subsequently writing the book. I did it simply to find out what my ethnicity truly was.
Uh-huh.
My adoptive father was Sicilian. My adoptive mother was Ukrainian. And I didn't know, and I was just curious. It didn't really matter, but I wanted to know. And when I submitted the sample, I guess, 23andMe was
Mhm.
backed up for quite some time. And I didn't get the results back until I had started the journey. And by that time, I knew all the names on my mother's side of the family. And
Oh,
when I got the
wow.
results back, the first name on the list of close relatives was a name I didn't recognize. And I assumed, boy, that's somebody who's on my father's side. And
Uh-huh.
at first, I thought it was a cousin. Turned out to be my half brother.
Oh, wow. And your father, what is the situation with him?
Unfortunately, he had also passed away. He
Mhm.
was 6 years older than my mother, so he had passed away back in 2004, I believe.
Mhm.
But my half brother was very, very open in discussing who he was and what he was about, and it was pretty easy to draw the connection between he and my birth mother. My belief was, or remains, he never knew he had fathered a son. They had a summer romance. My mother went back on the road, and I don't believe she ever looked back.
Right. Well, different times too back then. The options are a lot different.
Exactly true.
Mhm. Well, having I'm an adoptive parent. I have a daughter she's 49 now. And she was able to find her family as an adult. We were able to do a search and we found her brother, and through her brother, we found her mother and everybody else. Her brother had known everybody. So now she has quite an extended family.
It's interesting when you start to un yeah, start to peel the onion, so to speak. You wind up with lots
Yeah.
and lots of layers.
Yeah.
I'm in a book group out in Burlington, North Carolina, and it's an unlikely place for me. It's predominantly women, and it's predominantly women in their 70s and 80s. And we were discussing a book yesterday, The Nightingale, and there was a piece about should you or should you not reveal to a child who their parents are? And as it turned out, there were nine people sitting around that room. Four of the nine were either adoptive mothers, first mothers, or myself as an adoptee.
Oh,
So it's not a rare thing.
uh-uh.
It's always one out of three. This was one out of two.
Yeah. Yeah, we were fortunate that we knew the mother's name and the father's name and that, before the adoption because of a mistake made in the system. So I knew that much, but when we found her brother, then that took care of finding
That opened
everybody.
it up.
It sure
Yeah, I
did.
was fortunate as well.
Yeah.
My adoption was privately arranged, and
Mhm.
my adoptive mother kept a copy of the adoption decree, which had her name, my father's name, their attorney's name, and one other name, which, I knew intuitively had to be my birth mother. So when I started the journey, I was able to go back to that paper and had a huge head start on most people.
Yeah. Do you find that that you like to read a lot of books and stories about people who are adopted?
I've read some. I don't know that I focus totally on it. But yeah, it's interesting. I've made some friends through the entire process who have some are touched one way by adopt or another by adoption, as an adoptive mother or a birth mother, and they've written books, and I've certainly gone and looked after those.
Mm, interesting. Yeah, I know my daughter likes to, I get all the books and there are sometimes stories in there about adoptive family. She loves to look at all of those books. This
I
was
could probably
curious
send you
about.
a list of what I've read, and there may be something there she's interested in.
Might be, might be. So, how did you become interested in writing? Tell me your story about becoming a writer, your journey.
I really don't have a journey per se. Looking back, I remember being a young boy, and there was Boys Life magazine, and if you were a Cub Scout, you were automatically subscribed. And
Mhm.
I remember sending in a couple of kind of handwritten, penciled pieces to them, and I got very, very nice postcards back. Say, keep trying, but we can't use this right now.
Oh,
I recall my first published piece was in my high school yearbook, and everybody was required to submit something. And I submitted a piece which obviously, resonated with somebody, and it was
mhm.
used. I've had a number of hobbies over my life. I've bred horses. I've been I love to fly fish, and
Oh,
I've written articles for various publications around those interests, and those got published, but they were never written with the intent of what will I write next. There was just something that caught my interest, and I thought it was worth writing about. So honestly, until I got to that cemetery back in 2017, I had no thoughts of being a serious writer. And it wasn't until after I'd really started the journey that I had a good friend who I would have coffee with several times a week in the morning who was an author.
uh-huh.
And as I would tell him the story, he kept on shaking his head, said, "You need to write a book. You need
Yeah,
to write a book."
yeah.
So I started to at least collect the pieces, and I would kind of shuffle them and put them in some order and said, if I were to write a book, I'd do it this way. And then one day it just clicked with me. I said, I will write a book. And that's where it took off.
And so it sounds to me too like your would be kind of characterized as a memoir type of writer. And also, nonfiction based on experiences in your life. And boy, don't we need more writers like that? Because we really
Yeah, I was going
do.
to say, one of the privileges of age, if
Hmm.
there are some downsides to age, but I'm 77 now, and if you've been paying any attention at all in your life, you've experienced a lot of things.
Hmm.
And so if I have a theme to my writing, it's about experiences.
Yeah, well,
And I think, they're well worth preserving. This was a very unique story,
yeah.
and it was meaningful to me, but it's proven very meaningful to a lot of other people who I didn't know existed before. But
Yeah.
there are a ton of short stories to be written. I was on an airplane, I don't know, it's probably 2 months ago, and I was sitting next to a lady who was she was just kind of cranky. She was sitting there with a magazine, just, flipping through pages. And I finally involved her in a conversation. And I said, well, where are you? I said, do you live here, leaving North Carolina, or do you live in New York, which is where we were headed? And she said, well, said, I come from New York, but now most of my time I live in North Carolina, but I have a pied a terre in New York. And I'm thinking, well, la-di-da. And so I said, well, why are you going to New York? And said, well, I'm going to see a Gilbert and Sullivan show.
Oh my
But
goodness.
but they took my bag and now I'm going to be late and it's going to be very hard for my driver. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, this is like Queen Elizabeth here. But I got her talking. So where is your pied a terre? Is it on the east side or the west side of Manhattan? She said, no, it's in Queens. And ultimately, I found out that this little apartment was in the same community where my former wife, and this goes back 50 years, lived.
Mhm.
I said, really? She was trying to tell me where it was. I said, oh, I know. And then I told her, I said, well, I said, my former wife came from there. And she said, oh, what was her name? And I told her, and her eyes got big.
No.
She said, is her mother Dot? And I just sort of waited. I said, her name was Dorothea.
Yeah.
And, so there's a whole story there. I've written that part of it, but there's more to it beyond the conversation, with a couple of reminiscences of the ex.
Yeah.
So, as I said, if you've paid any attention, if you've been around, if you lived things, there's plenty to write about.
Absolutely. Yeah. I find that I can pretty much come up with anything just about experiences of life, which is probably why I write so much poetry.
Absolutely.
And I write other things too, but when it comes to writing something the closest to what's going on in life, it's probably going to come out in poetry.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we had the terrible flooding a week or so ago here in Hillsborough, and we have a place called the River Walk, and it was a walk that followed the Eno River from one part of a park down to an old NASCAR track that exists here. And it's been decimated.
Oh,
And what struck me, the damage is one thing, but I was very, very touched by the fact that there is so much community that surrounded the park. There's a community garden with a dedicated group of gardeners. There was a pollinator garden with another group of gardeners. There were half a dozen of us who every day, divvied up the responsibility of feeding two feral cats that lived along there. And all of that is gone for the moment.
goodness.
And and that really has moved me. I'm still kind of processing that, and I'll write about that.
Oh, sure. You
Yeah, it
must.
was just yeah, I took some pictures. They got on the local newspaper website and their front page of this week's View, print paper, and but it was a very, very, it's a real experience.
Yeah, there's definitely a story and all of that definitely needs to be told. Ah, I'm sorry that that's happened there. I've been watching it on the news. It's just devastating.
Yeah, it's something you would never have expected. Just nothing at all.
Yeah. Just like in Western Carolina, who knew?
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing, and this is what we experienced was small compared to Western Carolina. It very small compared to what's happened in Texas. But people are touched by it. People are really impacted.
Yeah. I lost most of my belongings in Hurricane Floyd, so whenever I see about flooding,
Yeah,
I
you
can
understand
relate
then.
to the devastation that people
Yeah.
go through and having to start over again. So it's heartbreaking. I'm thinking about those cats. Poor
Yeah,
little
it's you know what? That was a week ago. Every day I get up in the morning, I always go for a walk, and that's where I cross paths with the cats. But every day I have gone and I've driven up around where they might have headed as the water came up, and yeah, sort of stand there and call at them, and every now and then somebody would come out and look and say, "What are you doing?" They're looking for the cats, and I know I'm
Be
not the only
around.
one out of that group.
They might be around somewhere. They may have rehomed,
I'm
found
hoping.
another
I'm hoping.
neighborhood. Cats are resourceful. Yeah. So how long did it take you to write these books?
The first book took about 3 years from the time I started searching to the time it was published. And I published here right into the teeth of COVID. It was published in May of 2020. And somebody said, well, wait till September. All of this will be gone. And I said, no, I don't think so. So we got it out there. So there's about 3 years. And I fortunately had a very good editor who worked quickly with it and had some very good ideas for the way it laid out. And this second book, because I kind of hemmed and hawed and didn't really know how I wanted to approach it, probably, in bits and pieces took 4 years.
Mhm.
It took about a year to just sort of get over the first one.
Right.
And then I decided I wanted to do something. I had and one of these aha moments as I wrote the first book, and I said, no, I want to explore that and I want to pursue that. So there were a number of false starts with the approach, and then once I knew what I was doing with it, and I could get the discipline to really sit down and just make myself go. Then
Right.
it rolled out fairly well.
Yeah.
So there was still about 4 years in that process, though.
And what's the story behind your second book?
Well, as I wrote the first book, I was writing about adoption. I was writing about my own adoption.
Right.
And up to the point that I explored my story, if you had asked me about adoption, I would have seen it as a very transactional type of thing that, a mother unexpectedly becomes pregnant, is unable to tend to her child, places the child in someone else's hands, and just goes on with life. And what I came away with as I wrote is number one, there's a huge emotional decision to be made in deciding to relinquish a child. There's the emotional pain of leaving that child behind, perhaps never having hugged them and letting somebody else take them. And then, what really dawned on me is that a birth mother doesn't forget. And that certainly was validated when I started interviewing birth mothers, especially from that period, is, some would say, well, it's every holiday or on their birthday, I do something special. Others said I relinquished my son 50 years ago, and there's never been a day I didn't think about him. So that's a lot about what this book is about. I took my mother as a figure to represent all of those women and recreated. Actually, I put it into Chat GPT one day to see what Chat would say about it. And it used the word that I have reimagined her diary. And that's probably a very accurate thing.
Yeah.
So she gave birth to me in a hospital in New York City. There was a character in the first book, Mrs. Blumenthal, who assumed a maternal role because my mother managed her pregnancy and then the adoption in virtual secrecy.
Hmm.
And so Mrs. Blumenthal, after my birth, came to her, said, "Here's a blank diary. Every day, write in it. Just write what you think. It doesn't matter." And so for a period of 8 years through this book, she number one records where she was with as a performer. And she had a very interesting life through the United States and Europe and South America and the Caribbean. But melded in with those entries are the reflections of her emotional journey, which is that piece of, a mother doesn't forget. And it starts out with the pain of relinquishment and the battle then of, do I have it in my heart to have another child? Do I want another relationship with another man? And it kind of story arcs to an ultimate point where she makes a decision.
That's a really interesting idea to put that together like that. I mean, did you find that it was somewhat cathartic for you? Did it bring up some things for you to help you in processing?
Yeah, it did. And I never felt the adoption for some people is a very, very fraught
Mhm.
experience. They experience rejection or abandonment. And I never felt any of that. So I got into the first book purely as an intellectual exercise. It was
Okay.
just curiosity. But then I got to this part where I had a very, very emotional connection with my birth mother. And people always said, well, did you meet her? And I would say, no, well, what would you have said? The only thing I would want to have said to her is I realized the decision you made and it had to be difficult. It could not have turned out any better than it did, and just left it at that. But, so yeah, there was some catharsis there. And I certainly realized my mother may not have thought any of these things. And these are things I want to think she thought. But I tend to think based on all the interviews I did with other birth mothers, she carried the same burden of the shame and the secrecy and the sorrow of giving up your child.
Yeah. And I think that's quite believable, that that's what happened.
I'm very comfortable with it. I'm
Yeah.
also very comfortable that she never told anybody. Yeah, not she did ultimately marry, and obviously I met my half brother, so
Yeah.
she did have a child, but he never heard about me,
Mhm.
which is not unexpected or not surprising. But when I met cousins, the first question I would ask them is, "Tell me what you know about my adoption." And they would all shake their heads and said, never knew a thing. And in this family, if one person knew, everyone would have known.
Uh-huh.
So I don't think her husband knew. I don't think anybody knew. And
That
that's
was
that's
very
reflected in the
common.
book as well,
Yeah,
because that
yes,
was
very
an era of
common.
secrecy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everybody had a lot of secrets.
Yeah.
Um, so about the publishing process with your book, did you go through a traditional publisher or did you self-publish? How did you do this?
Well, naively, I thought that I could write this book, sell it to somebody very quickly, get a lot of money, and then decide what to do next. And
Hmm.
I did query close to 80 agents, got a couple of lukewarm responses, and they didn't go very far. And I sat, as I learned more, and I knew nothing going in about publishing. As I kind of self-educated, I found out that, number one, getting rejected by 78 out of 80 agents was not uncommon. Had I found one of those people who was responsive, might have then taken them a year and a half, 2 years or more to find a publisher who was interested. And then, the typical publishing cycle is a year to 2 years long.
Mhm.
And by then I was 71. I said, I don't have that much time. I
Yeah.
said, I'm going to do this myself. And I've been listening to a lot of self-publishing podcasts,
Hmm.
reading an awful lot. And I said, I think I can do this. I was approached by a couple of hybrid publishers. And when I looked at it, I thought I could come away with precisely the same thing at a lesser amount of money. And that's what I chose to do. And I created a team. As I said, I had a graphic designer who was a good friend. He created the cover for both books and $100 and a six-pack of beer.
Came
I
out good.
I found a an editor who I put trust in, and it was well rewarded. And I found a book formatter who did all of the content or the inner matter of the books. And pretty soon I had a series of files, and I just started downloading or uploading.
Excellent. Good for you. That's excellent. So, if you had advice to give to other people about publishing their work, what bit of advice would you give them?
I would say, go where your heart is telling you to go. If you're locked into the thought of a traditional publisher, go chase your dream. You might want to put some time limits on your dream. If you don't want to go through what I did with assembling the team and doing that kind of work, there are hybrid publishers. There are small press publishers. There are hybrid publishers, and just, vet those people, because, there are some who just want to make money, and there are some who do it solely for the passion of pursuing the art. And one can be as bad as the other. Now, I've got a friend who recently published with a publisher based in Greece,
Mhm.
and they did a wonderful job in putting together the book and getting it out there. But it's their passion. It's a hobby to them. So they've moved on to other things. And when she wants to do things promotionally, can't get a response. But they own the book at that point. So be careful who you turn your property over to.
Exactly. What?
If a traditional publisher will want to own your property, a
Mhm.
hybrid will typically not. And
Right.
that's important, and if you
Mhm.
have something which ultimately is very successful, you want to be the one who determines the course of that book and what you do with it. Um, just have fun with it. It's really not that difficult to process anymore.
Yeah.
And I would say, um, don't get put off by the belief that independent publishing or self-publishing is a negative thing anymore.
Right.
There are some fabulous books out there, and there are some very big time traditionally published authors who are now publishing independently. Melania Trump self-published, and then I do that in quotes, an audio book on 11 Labs. So that one was interesting in that, number one, it was independently produced, and number two, it was with an AI voice.
Mhm.
So, there are all sorts of things happening now. So don't get put off by the fact that there's something wrong with independent publishing. If you
Right.
want to get your story in front of people, there
Mhm.
are ways to do it, and there are ways to do it very easily.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is really in the marketing. You can produce a
Yeah,
book.
marketing is certainly, if you want to sell the book, that
Yeah.
that becomes more difficult than writing the book sometimes.
Have you gone out and done some marketing work as far as book talks or anything like that?
I do. I love that part of it. And I know I hear lots of authors say, well, I'm, I'm shy, and I don't want to talk to people. I love the face to face. And I love book clubs. I've done some library events. I've done senior centers. And if I can find them, I'll go to the bookstores. I will, do book fairs, and they're out there too. You just need to search them out,
Yeah.
and then you need to pursue them. And sometimes you don't get an answer. And yeah, I've started to get to the point where if I don't get an answer the first time, I'll wait some appropriate time and say my email must have gotten lost, but I wrote you, a month ago. I just didn't want to, yeah, didn't want to miss the opportunity. And most of those people will get back with you.
That's great. That's wonderful.
But
Yeah.
the face to face is fun, and there's rarely an opportunity or an occasion where having talked about what the books are about, that someone doesn't come up afterwards and kind of look around and whisper and say, you know what, I'm adopted too. Or I gave up a child, years ago. And people look to share their stories.
I believe that. I believe that you're opening opportunities for people to talk about their lives, and it makes a big difference to know
I
they're
think
not
one of the
alone.
first book clubs I did, a woman came up to my wife and literally did whisper. She said, I have never told anybody. My husband is here. He doesn't know. I gave up a child, and it was literally 50 or 60 years ago. And she said it feels so good to tell somebody.
Yeah.
And which
Yeah.
is terribly sad, but that 50 or 60 years ago, that was the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to share, or um, any parting thoughts?
Writers to read, you can come away with so much. And I sort of started back on my old stuff I should have read 30 or 40 years ago. Yeah, I've read John Cheever and John Updike and Philip Roth, and there's some great current writers. I love Michael Cunningham. He wrote The Hours, and he's written a couple of great books since. And Ann Patchett, which kind of surprised me because I always saw her advertisements and things and sort of saw her as a girly writer.
Uh-huh.
But she's wonderful, and she writes such beautiful dialogue and so many great relationships, within families. So yeah, that's been a gift to have found her.
Yeah,
So
that's
just,
great.
yeah, take time to read. You'll learn a lot from that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I read a lot. Probably, probably above average number of books I read in a
Yeah.
year. And mostly memoir and biographies are my favorites. And I like a little bit of fun too, but as far as fun fiction and stuff like mysteries and that. But yeah, it's important. If you don't read, I don't think you can write as well. I think reading is the key.
No, I agree. You'll learn so much from it. And I guess the other part is just write.
Mhm. Yeah,
You may be self-critical if you go to writers groups and such, you'll find out there are some people who write much better than you. You'll also find out you're writing much better than some others, so just
yeah.
put the pen in your hand and start.
Well, some people may write really well on what they are most interested in. If they were approaching writing something that you might be more interested in, and that might not be the same way for them.
That's absolutely true.
They get kind of in a certain genre and kind of stick with that. For me, I like to explore different, kind of go to the edge a little bit and explore different options when I write. And some of the things that come out of my pen would surprise people. And some things I probably would never share.
And that's all right. I think we all have those.
Then that's all
We'd
right.
probably write more of them, except people would tie us together with them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Edward, it's been great talking with you today. I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Lisa.
you coming on, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and keep that
Thank you
writing
so much. I
going.
enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.